All right, let's dive in. We're going to break down one of the most famous and maybe most misunderstood phases of life, the midlife crisis.
You know the cliches, right? The sports car, the affair, the sudden urge to go climb a mountain. But to really get what's going on, to get to the real story, we need to meet someone. So this is Reginald Perrin. Now, he's the star of a super famous British novel and sitcom from the 70s. And honestly, he pretty much became the poster child for the man in crisis.
Picture this. Reggie is 46. He's a middle manager, stuck in the suburbs, dragging himself to a job he absolutely despises at a place called Sunshine Desserts. He's just completely over it. His life, his job, even his marriage.
So this feeling just builds and builds until one day he does something pretty drastic. He just walks away, leaves his clothes on a beach, wades into the ocean, and vanishes. Poof, gone to start a totally new life. I mean, yeah, it's extreme, for sure, but it really gets to the heart of what this crisis is all about.
Okay, so what's really fascinating is how the experts back then would have explained what Reggie did. They looked inward, Their focus was totally internal, pointing to two main culprits, what was going on in his head and what was happening to his body. This is where the term actually comes from. Back in 1965, a psychoanalyst named Elliot Jacques coined the phrase midlife crisis, and he described it as this really weird paradox. Think about it. You finally hit the peak of your life, the top of the hill, only to look out and see that the rest of the path only goes one way, downhill, toward death. Jacques had a name for this period, the deadline decade. It's that moment when the awareness that you're not going to live forever really hits you, and it triggers this frantic, sometimes depressing crisis. It's that feeling of, oh man, time is running out. And that's where all those classic stereotypes come from. Jacques saw these behaviors as, well, kind of manic. It's this desperate, compulsive race against the clock to prove to yourself, and maybe everyone else, that you're still young, you've still got it. So back then, the explanation was pretty much boiled down to two things. Either it was a psychological crisis, almost like a second adolescence, where you start questioning everything about who you are, or it was biological, a reaction to your body physically changing, the natural process of aging, which scientists call senescence. But here's the twist. If we just explain Reggie's crisis as his personal problem, something going on inside his head or his body, we're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. What if it wasn't just about him? Let's zoom out for a second. If we pull the camera back and look at the bigger picture, you start to see these massive social and cultural forces at play in the 20th century. And they created the perfect storm, the exact conditions for something like a midlife crisis to even exist in the first place. See, in the middle of the 20th century, this new, super rigid life path popped up. It was like an unspoken script for how life was supposed to go. And this script created this unique kind of pressure cooker, especially for people smack in the middle of their lives. Suddenly, all these major life events became incredibly standardized, kind of compressed. For the first time, there was this really strict social timetable telling you when you should get married, when you should have kids, and when you should retire. A whole checklist. And the shift was wow. It was traumatic. Just look at the numbers. The percentage of women married by the time they were 24 more than doubled in just a couple of decades. An entire generation got locked into this brand new, standardized rhythm of life. And of course, this new timetable brought a whole new set of stresses. You had this intense anxiety about hitting all the right milestones. You had the financial squeeze of being in the sandwich generation, caring for kids and aging parents at the same time. And then there's the empty nest, this daunting idea of decades stretching out ahead of you after the kids leave. This was the social stick, the big push that drove people like Reggie right to the edge. But here's where it gets really interesting. At the exact same moment all these pressures, the stick, were building up, a really seductive new idea popped up. This was the cultural carrot, and it was promising a fantastic way out of the whole trap. And you might not believe this, but the phrase, life begins at 40, it actually started way back in 1917. And it wasn't about buying a sports car. It was originally a call for middle-aged women to stay healthy so they could contribute to the World War I effort. But then, this guy, Walter Pitkin, writes a best-selling self-help book, and he totally transforms the meaning. The phrase becomes this mantra that promises, hey, your best years are still ahead of you. And the way to find that happiness wasn't through duty anymore, but through fun, through leisure, through buying stuff. Now, this idea tapped right into the American dream, which was a new concept at the time. And originally, that dream wasn't just about having a nice car and a big house. It was this really grand, noble vision of a society where every single person could reach their absolute fullest potential. But then history happened. The absolute trauma of 2 world wars and the constant dread of the Cold War, it just shattered those higher ideals. That grand vision of building a better world, it pretty much vanished, replaced by a whole lot of anxiety and cynicism. So what was left of that big dream? Well, a kind of hollowed-out version. It became this desperate search for personal happiness, right now, through instant gratification and just consuming things. And often that came at the expense of your family and your commitments. And this was the seductive pull for someone like Reggie, feeling trapped.
Okay, let's put it all together. What was really going on with Reggie Perrin and with this whole idea of the midlife crisis? All right, here is the absolute key takeaway. The midlife crisis, it's not some natural, inevitable part of getting older. It was a phenomenon born from a very specific moment in history. It was the collision of that intense social pressure, the stick, and that cultural promise of personal freedom, the carrot. It shows us that we aren't just aged by our bodies, we're aged by history.
And that leaves us with a pretty powerful question for us right now. If the classic midlife crisis was a story from the 20th century, what are the new stories our culture is telling us about aging today? What are the new pressures and the new promises that are shaping how you and I experience getting older